Good afternoon. I'll call to order this regularly scheduled meeting of the Community Development Committee of the Metropolitan Council, the Met Council's first meeting of 2020. Congratulations. All, welcome back and Happy New Year. Hope everyone enjoyed their holidays. Uh, Committee members, we have an agenda before us. Are there any changes, amendments? If not, I'll entertain a motion for approval, please.
So moved.
Second.
Great discussion. Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. And next is approval of the minutes of December 16th, 2019 of the CDC. Is there a motion?
Move approval.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And we move on to our business items. First business item is the City of Oak Grove 2040 Comprehensive Plan. It's 2020-1. And that will be presented by Eric Wycheck. Mr. Wycheck, welcome. Happy New Year.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Lilligren. Happy New Year to you. And
Thank you.
the City of Oak Grove is here today, and they seem to think that I was generous in putting this first on the agenda, and I said it was all because of me, but it was actually completely accidental. My name is Eric Wycheck. I'm a sector representative for Districts 2, 9, and 10. Oak Grove is within District 9. And I'd like to let the committee know that Chuck Schwartz, the team leader over at MSA Consulting, is in the audience. He worked on this plan, and the City of Oak Grove's City Administrator, Lauren Wickham, is also in the audience. I think they're kind of in the middle there.
Thank you for being here.
Wanted to thank them both for all the hard work on this plan. Oak Grove was one of the first cities out of the gate in terms of getting us up there to work with them on their checklist and work with them on the plan. So that was, we've had a really good working relationship with them through the process.
Great.
So, do I have here we go. This map shows the location of the regional system components within the City of Oak Grove. Anoka County is the park implementing agency for this area. And the regional park system components consist of the Lake George and Rum River Central Regional Parks. There's also the North Anoka County Regional Trail Search Corridor. And there's also some state recreational land in the city, the Robert and Marilyn Berman Wildlife Management Area. And that's in Figure 1 of the report. In terms of wastewater, the plan does not propose nor anticipates requesting connection to the regional wastewater disposal system in the future, and will continue to rely on SSTSs for new development. For transportation, there are no principal arterials located within the City of Oak Grove. The community designation for the City of Oak Grove as of the 2015 system statement was rural residential and diversified rural, as you can see from this slide. There is a revised community designation within the 2040 plan, and the designation for rural residential still is the same, but within the southeast portion of the city, the staff report in the background section highlights that southeast portion has been changed from diversified rural to rural residential, and that was changed through the state legislature in 2017. And with the removal of that diversified rural community designation, about 1,000 acres in that southeast portion of the city, the council will also revise its water resources policy plan to show that that southeast portion of the city is no longer planned for any post-2040 urban services, and that urban service would have come from that East Bethel plant just to the east of that location. Oak Grove is located in the northern portion of Anoka County. It is surrounded by the communities of St. Francis to the north, East Bethel, Ham Lake, Andover, Ramsey, and Nowthen. Table 1 within the staff report shows that between 2020 and 2040, the council forecasts the city will grow by 1,800 people, representing about 1,000 households. There will be an increase at that same time of around 80 jobs within the city. The city's existing land use map refers to Figure 3 in the staff report. Existing land uses in Oak Grove are predominantly agricultural and undeveloped land at about 66%. Second largest use being residential at 22%. And most of the existing commercial and industrial are located along the transportation corridors in the community. Around 11% of the city is parks and open space. The plan is consistent with Thrive for land use and residential density policies for a rural residential community designation. Within the plan, the city guides rural residential land at a development density of 1 unit per 2.5 acres. Future land use, the 2040 future land use doesn't differ too much from what we saw in the 2030 plan. The city's historic development pattern and previous comprehensive plan approvals and the special law that came into effect really dictate how the city has developed with this rural residential development pattern of 2.5 acre lots. Due to the rural residential designation, regional wastewater, as I mentioned earlier, regional wastewater service is not contemplated for the city of Oak Grove in this planning period. The city indicates that the rural residential land use category is intended to maintain the existing rural development pattern established through previous planning efforts. Properties are required to maintain enough buildable land to accommodate the construction of permitted structures, including primary and secondary septic systems or community systems in the case of cluster housing. So the City of Oak Grove does take into account the Metropolitan Council's flexible development guidelines. So in some cases, they will allow for cluster development. The proposed findings within the report state that the plan conforms to metropolitan system plans, is consistent with council policies, and is compatible with the plans of adjacent local governmental units and affected jurisdictions. This plan will be on the Metropolitan Council agenda at the January 22nd meeting. And again, I just want to point out that Chuck Schwartz from MSA is in the audience, and Lauren Wickham from the City of Oak Grove are in the audience, and I'd like to thank them for all their hard work on this plan. Proposed action here, the council staff propose the following actions. Authorize the City of Oak Grove to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect. Revise the community designation for that southeastern portion of the city to rural residential in accordance with a special law from the first special session in 2017. And advise the city to implement the advisory comments in the review record for wastewater, surface water management, land use, and water supply. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Wycheck. Questions on that report? Any questions? Seeing none, I'd like to thank Mr. Schwartz, is it? Mr. Schwartz and Mr. Wickham for being here today. Thanks for your work. I would entertain a motion to approve the City of Oak Grove 2040 Comprehensive Plan.
So moved. Second.
Thank you. Any discussion on that motion? Discussion. Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Thank you. We'll move on to our second business item. It's 2020-3. It'll be heard in the Environment Committee as well. It's the City of Brooklyn Park 2040 Comprehensive Plan and Comprehensive Sewer Plan. And again, this is yours, Mr. Wycheck.
Thank you, Chair Lilligren. I wanted to see if City of Brooklyn Park representatives are in the audience, or did they not? They're not here yet. We might be moving too fast for them.
I'm sure they're here in spirit.
We'll keep an eye out if people come in the room. I know that the City of Brooklyn Park's Planning Director, Cindy Sherman, plans to be in attendance today, along with Aaron Perdue, the Director of Community Planning and Economic Development for WSB Consulting. So we'll keep an eye out for them so we can thank them later on. Before you is the City of Brooklyn Park's 2040 Comprehensive Plan. This map here shows the regional system components within the City of Brooklyn Park. Three Rivers Park District is the park implementing agency for the City of Brooklyn Park. And in terms of regional park system components, we have the Mississippi Gateway Regional Park, formerly known as the Coon Rapids Dam Regional Park. That name has changed. Shingle Creek, Rush Lake, and Crystal Lake Regional Trails, and the West Mississippi River Regional Trails Search Corridor. These are all located within Figure 1 in your report. There are no state or federal recreation lands within the city. The city's plan accurately accounts for the metropolitan highway system of principal arterials, of which there are 4. The most important one maybe to mention would be that the plan has identified planned additions and improvements that are within the current revenue scenario of the TPP, including Trunk Highway 169 or 101st Avenue interchange. The plan also incorporates existing and future transitways, including 5 LRT stations along the Blue Line extension, also within the current revenue scenario within the TPP. For transitways that are in service or in advanced stages of planning, the plan incorporates guiding land use for station areas that meet the minimum density targets of the TPP. In terms of wastewater, all wastewater generated within the city is conveyed through 7 council interceptors, and all that flow is treated at the council's Metropolitan Wastewater Treatment Plant in St. Paul. MSP 2040 has this area designated, has the city designated as suburban. Brooklyn Park is located along the northeastern border of Hennepin County. It is surrounded by the communities of Champlin, Coon Rapids, Fridley, Brooklyn Center, Crystal, New Hope, Plymouth, Maple Grove, and Osseo. Table 1, also in your staff report, shows that between 2020 and 2040, the council forecasts that the city will grow by 14,900 people, representing 5,580 households. There will be an increase of 8,100 jobs in the city in the same time frame. The plan does request for a forecast revision, but not to the 2040 totals. The forecast revision really applies to the 2020 and 2030 totals, and council staff have agreed to that change. Table 2 from the staff report shown here illustrates the planned residential density in the suburban area of the city, the suburban community designation. The overall density for guided residential land is expected to be between 11.04 and 42.32 units per acre. Communities with that suburban designation are expected to grow at overall average densities of at least 5 units per acre and target opportunities for more intensive development near regional transit investments. Brooklyn Park's plan is consistent with this policy. The existing land uses within the city are predominantly residential at just below 50%, with most of the existing commercial and office about 5%, and industrial areas just over 6% near the transportation corridors. Approximately 12% of the city is parks and open space. The city's future land use map refers to Figure 4 in your staff report. The most interesting thing about the future land use really is the incorporation of the 5 station areas and planning for appropriate density and intensity of use around those station areas. The plan recognizes those 5 Metro Blue Line LRT station areas, which are part of that current revenue scenario in the TPP. TPP directs suburban communities with planning LRT to guide at average minimum densities of 20 residential units per acre and target 40 to 75 plus units per acre within the station area or within a 10-minute walk or half mile. The planned densities for areas identified for redevelopment in station areas within the city are consistent with the minimum density required in the TPP. The city of Brooklyn Park has been planning for this LRT extension. They've done a lot of work in this area since 2016. They've also incorporated transit-oriented development zoning in 2018. So they've been pretty hard at work in planning for this major regional transit investment. Council staff finds that the plan conforms to regional system plans, is consistent with council policies with the proposed forecast changes. It's compatible with the plans of adjacent local governmental units and affected jurisdictions. This plan will be before the Environment Committee on Tuesday, January 14th, and then it will go to the Council for authorization on Wednesday, January 22nd. And I just want to see if any Brooklyn Park representatives are here. No, not yet. Okay, maybe they didn't make it. In any case, we worked really hard with the city on this plan. I believe, well, there was a bit of toing and froing in terms of letters back and forth and working with them on this, so I'm happy to have the plan at this stage ready for authorization. The city's been great to work with throughout this whole process. So yeah, I'd like to personally thank Cindy Sherman. She's been very professional and wonderful to work with. The proposed actions within the staff report are the following: to authorize the City of Brooklyn Park to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect, to revise the city's forecast for the 2020 and 2030 decades downward, as shown in Table 1 of the review record, to revise the city's affordable housing need allocation in line with that forecast revision to 795 units, and advise the city to adopt the Mississippi River Critical Corridor Area Plan within 60 days of receiving final DNR approval, and submit a copy of the final adopted plan and evidence of adoption to the DNR, Metropolitan Council, and the National Park Service within 10 days after the adoption. Finally, to implement the advisory comments in the review record for forecast, housing, and water supply. Happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Wojcik. Questions on that report? Any questions? If not, Councilmember Chambliss, would you like to move approval of the City of Brooklyn Parks 2040 Comprehensive?
I'd be glad to move approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please pass our thanks on to Ms. Sherman and the City of Brooklyn Park staff. Item 3 is 2020-2. Also will be seen in Environment Committee. It's the City of Waconia 2040 Comprehensive Plan and Comprehensive Sewer Plan. And it'll be Ms. Raya Smiley that'll present. Mrs. Smiley, welcome. Happy New Year.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, council members. Happy New Year.
Thank you.
I'm Raya Smiley. I'm the senior planner in local planning assistance, and I'm the sector representative for Carver and Scott County. So that's District 4 and Chanhassen. That's District 3. And fortunately, folks from the city could not be here today. I thought that they will be, so we will keep an eye out for them as well. So before you today is the City of Waconia's 2040 Comprehensive Plan for your action. This map shows the regional system components within the City of Waconia. There are no principal arterial within the City of Waconia, and there's also 2 MCES interceptors within the city, as well as Lake Waconia Carver Regional Trail Search Corridor and County Road 10 Regional Trail Search Corridor. So those are, and then there's the, Lake Waconia Regional Park that is kind of in the upper corner. That's technically partially within the orderly annexation agreement boundary with the Waconia Town, not Waconia Town, sorry, Laketown Township. So that's also in the ultimate boundary of the City of Waconia. Thrive MSP 2040 designated the city as emerging suburban edge. The City of Waconia is located within Carver County, and it is surrounded by the 2 townships of Laketown and Waconia. So Laketown is to the east, and then Waconia Township is to the south and west. Table 1, also in your staff report, shows that between 2020 and 2040, the council forecasts that the city will grow by 9,800 people, representing 4,100 households, and there will be an increase of 2,600 jobs in the city within the same time frame. This is the table 2 of the staff report. It illustrates the planned residential density within the emerging suburban edge designation of the City of Waconia. The overall density for guided land is expected to be between 3.39 and 8.17 units per acre. The communities that are designated as emerging suburban edge by Thrive are expected to plan for forecasted population and growth at density of at least 3 units per acre, 3 to 5 units per acre for both development and redevelopment, and Waconia is consistent with our policy for that. This is the city's existing land use map, so you can see the boundary of the city with that very thick dashed line. So in the city of Waconia, with their existing land use, the majority of the existing land use is residential, and that's about 45%. And otherwise, after that, is they have some office, commercial, and industrial uses. There are most of the areas within on the edge of the city are agricultural, and we'll talk a little more about the land use in this map. So this is the future land use map. That is the figure 4 of your staff report. The plan includes the areas that are identified with a boundary of like a red boundary. You can see there are a few points. Those are areas within Waconia Township that the city does not have an orderly annexation agreement with the township. So those areas that they have planned for, that is basically the ultimate vision for that area as they are annexed into the community when an annexation request is on the table. The areas that are to the right of this, the majority of the boundary of the, sorry, can I point? I cannot point. So basically the entire eastern side of the city, that's an area that the city has an orderly annexation agreement with Laketown Township, and therefore the city has the authority to plan for any of those areas that are within their orderly annexation boundary with Laketown Township. And they also identify all the areas that are designated as agricultural preserves. So, and plan for those accordingly with the density of no more than 1 unit per 40 acre. So the proposed findings before you is that the plan conforms to the metropolitan system plans, is consistent with council policies, and is compatible with the plans of adjacent local governmental units and affected jurisdictions. This plan is scheduled to go to the Environment Committee next week on January 14th, and then for the Metropolitan Council meeting on January 22nd. So the proposed action before you, which is a bit of a lengthy one, is to authorize the City of Waconia to put into effect the portion of its 2040 comprehensive plan pertaining to the areas within the city's boundary as of November 19, 2019. That is the date that we deemed the plan complete. And those portions of Laketown Township for which the city has an existing orderly annexation agreement. And advise the city that the council has reviewed the remainder of the plan and has found no regional system conformance or policy consistency issues at this time, because the city does not have the legal authority to plan and zone for areas within Waconia Township in the absence of an OAA. The city may not put those portions of the plan into effect at this time, at such time as the City of Waconia acquires jurisdiction of the lands planned for future urbanization in Waconia Township, either through an orderly annexation agreement or annexation by ordinance. The city will need to submit appropriate plan amendments to the council for further review and action. And also advise the city to implement the advisory comments in the review record for surface water management, land use, and water supply. And with that, I am happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Questions on that report? Any questions? Seeing none, Mrs. Smiley has proposed a series of actions relative to the 2020 City of Waconia 2040 Comprehensive Plan. Is there a motion for approval?
Move approval.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion on that motion? Discussion. Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That carries. Thank you. We'll move on to business item number 4, 2020-10. Also will be in the Environment Committee. It's the City of Chanhassen 2040 Comprehensive Plan and Comprehensive Sewer Plan. And this is yours again, Mrs. Smiley.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, council members. I would like to let the committee know that staff from the City of Chanhassen are here in the audience. Kate Hansen, the Community Development Director, Bob Generous, Senior Planner, and Mackenzie Young Walters, Associate Planner, are all all in the audience, and I want to thank them for the process of going through this plan and working with us so closely. It was a delight. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so before you today is the City of Chanhassen's 2040 Comprehensive Plan. This map shows the location of the regional system components within the City of Chanhassen. From the transportation policy plan components, the highway, Trunk Highway 7 and Trunk Highway 212 are both going through the City of Chanhassen. There are several regional parks policy plan components within the city. That's Lake Minnewaska Regional Park, Minnesota River Bluffs LRT Regional Trail, Highway 101 Regional Trail Search Corridor, Highway 5 Regional Trail Search Corridor, Twin Cities and Western Regional Trail Search Corridor, County Road 61 Regional Trail Search Corridor, and Highway 4 Regional Trail Search Corridor. There are also 6 interceptors, MCS interceptors within the boundary of the City of Chanhassen. Thrive has designated the city as emerging suburban edge. Chanhassen is located along the eastern border of Carver County. So it is surrounded by the communities of Shorewood, Minnetonka, Eden Prairie, Shakopee, Jackson Township, Chaska, and Victoria. Table 1, which is also in your staff report, shows that between 2020 and 2040, the council forecasts that the city will grow by 10,400 people, representing 4,000 households. There will be an increase of 2,800 jobs in the city in the same time frame. As you can see, this includes the proposed changes to the forecast that is also part of the action for this item. Table 2 of the staff report shows similar information, but this is the sewer service forecasts, which are also being revised for the population and for all 2020, 2030, 2040. Households and employment. So all the sewer service forecasts are being revised, and that's also part of the action. Table 3 from the staff report is the planned residential density in the city of Chanhassen. The overall density for guided residential land use is between 3.05 and 7.04 units per acre. Thrive directs emerging suburban edge communities to plan for residential growth in development and redevelopment areas between 3 and 5, at a minimum of 3 to 5 units per acre. And the City of Chanhassen's plan is consistent with our policies. Figure 3 of the staff report is the existing land use plan for the City of Chanhassen. As you can see, the majority of the land uses within the city are low density residential. That's about a third of the city, and after that followed by office, industrial, and commercial. And also about 9% of the city is parks and open space. This is the figure 4 of the staff report, which is the future land use. In the future, this is it shows that the city has planned for the majority of the industrial and activity-based land uses along the transportation corridors, and that's basically immediately west of, and some areas immediately west of Lakes Lucy and Ann, and some areas in the central Chanhassen. So the proposed findings before you today is that the city's plan conforms to the metropolitan system plans, is consistent with council policies with the proposed forecast changes, and is compatible with the plans of adjacent local governmental units and affected jurisdictions. The meeting schedule is similar to the City of Waconia. The plan is scheduled to go before the Environment Committee on January 14th and before the whole Metropolitan Council on January 22nd. The proposed action before you is to authorize the City of Chanhassen to place its 2040 Comprehensive Plan into effect, revise the city's forecast upward as shown in Table 1 of the review record, revise the city's sewer service forecast upward as shown in Table 2 of the review record, and advise the city to implement the advisory comments in the review record for surface water management. With that, I want to remind the community that staff from the City of Chanhassen in the audience, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mrs. Smiley, and thanks to our visitors from Chanhassen for your collaboration and your work on this. Any questions on that report? Any questions? Seeing none, Mrs. Smiley has proposed action on the City of Chanhassen 2040 Comprehensive Plan. Is there a motion to approve?
Move approval.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion on that motion? Discussion. Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Thanks again, Mrs. Smiley. Business item number 5 is 2020-4, also will be in Environment Committee. It's the City of Golden Valley 2040 Comprehensive Plan and Comprehensive Sewer Plan, presented by Michael Larson. Mr. Larson, welcome. Happy New Year.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, and Happy New Year to you as well. I'm Mike Larson. I'm Senior Planner in Local Planning Assistance in the Community Development Division. I'm also the Sector Rep for Golden Valley. I do want to let the committee know that Jason Zimmerman, the City of Golden Valley's planning manager, was not able to join us this afternoon, but I did get a few comments from him that I'd like to share with you about their comprehensive plan and the adoption of it. So before you today is the review of the City of Golden Valley's 2040 Comprehensive Plan. This map shows the location of regional system components within the city. Regional park system elements include the Theodore Worth Regional Park and the Loose Line, Victory Memorial, and Bassett Creek Regional Trails. Regional trail search corridors include the South Hennepin West, or CP Rail, and CP Rail Extension regional trail search corridors. Future transit ways include the Metro Blue Line extension, including the single station that will serve Golden Valley at Golden Valley Road. And regional highway system elements include Interstate 394, Olson Memorial Highway, and Highway 100. All wastewater generated within the city is conveyed through 3 council interceptors and is treated at the council's Metropolitan Wastewater Treatment Plant in St. Paul. Thrive MSP designates the city as urban. Golden Valley is located in east central Hennepin County and is surrounded by the communities of New Hope, Crystal, Robbinsdale, Minneapolis, St. Louis Park, and Plymouth. So as shown in Table 1, the city has proposed the future households and population that are revised higher. A recent boom in multifamily development, not an unusual story, has pushed up both near-term and long-term growth. The city also proposes a lower employment forecast, and city and council staff have discussed this and agreed upon this revision. Table 2 from the staff report, also shown here, illustrates the planned residential density in the urbanized areas of the city. The overall density for guided residential land is expected to be between 15.2 and 60.4 units per acre. Communities with an urban designation under Thrive are expected to plan for forecasted population and household growth at average densities of 10 units per acre for new development and redevelopment. Urban communities are expected to target opportunities for more intensive development near transit investments at densities in a manner articulated in the Transportation Policy Plan. And Golden Valley's plan is consistent with this policy. Although I will note that they're fairly limited, given the proximity of the Golden Valley Station near Theodore Worth Park, there are somewhat limited redevelopment opportunities at that station. The city of Golden Valley includes the world headquarters for General Mills and the Tennant Company, as well as major presence by Honeywell. The city includes Theodore Worth Regional Park, although this is a unit of the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board. And it will be served by, as I mentioned before, the planned extension of the Blue Line at Golden Valley Road. The plan in general identifies 6 redevelopment areas and more specific areas for potential redevelopment through 2040. Guiding for commercial and industrial land throughout the city coincides with the major transportation corridors that serve the city, including the Interstate 394, Olson Memorial Highway, Highway 100, and also the 3 railroad corridors that intersect the city, including the BNSF, Canadian Pacific, and Union Pacific. The proposed findings for you today is that the plan conforms to metropolitan system plans, is consistent with council policies, and is compatible with the plans of adjacent local governmental units and affected jurisdictions. The meeting schedule for this is that on January 14th, Environmental Services staff will present to the Environmental Committee and will be seen by the full council at the January 22nd meeting. Let's see here. Proposed action for you is to authorize the City of Golden Valley to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect, to revise the city's forecast upward, as shown in Table 1 of the attached review record, and revise the city's allocation of affordable housing need accordingly to 222 units, and advise the city to implement some advisory comments related into in the review record of surface water management. And before I conclude, I would like to read the email that I received from the city, or from Jason Zimmerman, the planning manager. He says that overall, our planning commission and city council are pleased with the cohesiveness of the new plan and the lists of goals and action items at the end of each chapter. Organized by timing, 1, 5, and 10-year targets and relative costs. And that was also something that we were impressed with, as well as the ability to use that material in the plan to excerpt that material and to present on an annual basis for work planning and capital improvement planning. Jason goes on to say, as planning staff, we are excited about updating our update to mixed-use zoning district, which will allow which will promote nodes of activities along major transportation corridors. He says we've already had interest from developers in advance of the rezonings in our downtown and along Douglas Drive. And he concludes by saying, I think we will be focusing a lot on housing and sustainability in the next few years. So, Mr. Chair, that concludes my presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Larson, and thanks to Mr. Zimmerman for his comments and for the city's work on this. Are there any questions on that report? Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Larson. I was just curious, with the uptick in multifamily housing, do we track where these people are coming from? Are they coming from Minneapolis or other western suburbs?
Mr. Larson.
I might defer to the director to answer that question more globally.
Director Brajas.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Lee, not specifically for an individual development, growth in Golden Valley, for example, we don't track as it is occurring. Our staff do look at, if you recall, the presentation that Todd Graham from our research unit gave last fall around forecasting and census and how those two pieces work together, is that we do look at in-migration, out-migration, changes from international immigration as well that influence our overall growth, but movements within the metro area are much more difficult to track on a regular basis.
Thank you. Further questions on the report? Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not a question, just a comment. I grew up in Golden Valley, and I lived there from like 1968 until 76 or so. And I was a geek way back then, so I still remember that the population was around 24,000 at the time.
Still is.
They have a lot more housing units now. It dropped for some time, and now they're just getting back to that population level that they had back in the early 1970s, which shows you the power of household size, because they have a lot more households now than they did then.
Thank you. Thanks for that comment. Further comments or questions on Mr. Larson's report? Seeing none, Mr. Larson proposes 4 actions related to the City of Golden Valley 2040 Comprehensive Plan. Is there a motion to approve?
Please.
I meant to call on you. I'm sorry, Councilmember Atlas-Singer-Pitson. Thank you for that motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Discussion on the motion. Discussion. Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Thank you, Mr. Larson. Business item number 6, 20-11. It's the Ramsey County 2040 Comprehensive Plan. Patrick Boylan will present. Mr. Boylan, welcome. Happy New
Thank you,
Year.
Chair Legrand, council members. I'm Patrick Boylan. I'm the sector representative in 13, 14, 15, and 16. Your staff report makes mention of Councilmembers Lindstrom, Vento, and Musée, but I just want to add that Councilmember Lee and Fredson are also part of Ramsey County. Fredson exclusively in just a portion of St. Paul, and Councilmember Lee in some suburban communities, but also a significant portion of St. Paul as well.
Thank you for pointing that out.
I'd like the committee to know that Max Holthusen of Ramsey County is in the audience today. And as a quick thank you to the collaborative effort he represented, I was invited to, he and I met a couple of times early on in their process. And then he also invited me to speak with other staff and county commissioners but then also had a chance when they reached out to their suburban communities and had a larger meeting, and I was invited to come to that as well. So I just wanted to extend a personal and professional thank you for that. There are many regional systems in Ramsey County. I'm not going to name them all. However, the map before you from the staff report shows that Ramsey County is the most urbanized county in the state and therefore the metro, and includes segments of at least 4 interstate freeways and several minor arterials. And to summarize, there are many regional wastewater meters and lift stations, bus rapid transit, and the Metro Green Line is a significant transit investment by the council in the county. And a regional airport is located outside of downtown St. Paul, and the region's largest wastewater treatment plant is located in the county as well. There are numerous regional trails and search corridors in the county, including Long Lake, Bald Eagle, Otter Lake, Battle Creek, and my personal favorite is Hidden Falls Crosby Farm, and Como's in there too. The community designation for the county, Ramsey County is located in the central part of the 7-county metropolitan area, and as stated earlier, it's the most urbanized county in the state. And except for North Oaks and a very small portion of Blaine, it's hard to see. The county is the community designations are suburban, urban, and urban center. It's bordered by Anoka, Washington, Dakota, and Hennepin counties. So Ramsey County, unlike a city, Ramsey County does not have land use authority. So the majority of their focus is on human services, parks, and transportation. And so I just want to take a quick second and talk about what I think is the most beautiful county building in the metropolitan area. If you have a chance, if you haven't, you go up there for a meeting in St. Paul with Ramsey County. Take a minute to look at the outside of the building and the inside of the building. This bas relief on the outside embedded into the facade is rather stunning. It has a very kind of dated look to it. This looks like the mid to late 1920s, maybe 1930s. And the statue on the inside is first commissioned or unveiled in 1936, and names were added to commemorate the war dead from World War I. 1988, the VFW added names of soldiers who died in combat from World War II, Korean War, Vietnam War, and now there's 1,578 names engraved on the walls that are surrounding lost to war. The statue was later renamed Vision of Peace in 1994 at a special ceremony involving 3 major Native American Indian tribes. The statue weighs approximately 60 tons and is 38 feet high and was carved from onyx stone. And the elevators, of course, are rather stunning too. Back to regional policy. Table 1 in your staff report shows that between 2020 and 2040, the council forecasts the county will grow by 45,100 people, and that represents 20,590 households. There will be an increase of 36,940 jobs in the county in the same time frame. In your staff report, the proposed findings is the plan conforms to metropolitan system plans. It's consistent with council policies, and it's compatible with the plans of adjacent local governmental units and affected jurisdictions. Later this month, the full council will see this. This will not go to the Environment Committee because there's no regional sanitary sewer. That's under the jurisdiction of the county. Proposed action as part of my staff report states to authorize Ramsey County to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect and to advise the county to adopt the Mississippi River Critical Area Plan within 60 days of receiving the DNR final approval, and to submit a copy of the final adopted plan and evidence of adoption to the DNR, the Metropolitan Council, and National Park Service within 10 days after the adoption. Proposed action also continues to say that the authorization of the county's plan does not commit the council to funding expansion or improvements to Trunk Highway 36, the interchange at Interstate 35E and County Road J, the Anoka County's interchange at County Road J and Interstate 35W right on the border of the county, and as these projects are not in the current revenue service of the Transportation Policy Plan. Also further, to implement the advisory comments in the review record for forecasts and transportation. Just as a reminder, Max Holdhusen is in the audience today, and I'm available for any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Boyd. Thank you, Mr.
Boylan.
Boylan. Thank you. I had a little brain moment. And I was trying to remember the name of the Ramsey County staffer that you said, and that was a doozy. So if you could remind me.
Max Holthusen. Yeah.
Holdusen.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Holdusen, for being here and for your work on this. Any questions on Mr. Boylan's report?
Mr. Chair,
Yeah,
I
Councilmember
just
Johnson.
want to do a shout out. You know, I've been watching Ramsey County Means Business showing up in the media lately, and while it's not directly related to this comp plan, it's really a culmination of a lot of work over recent years to really target additional business growth, and site selectors are kind of the primary target of that. But I do appreciate, you know, in our metropolitan region, the efforts to, again, grow our business community, you know, economic engine in the state. And certainly it's showing up, I would believe, in some of these employment numbers too. So just kudos to them.
Great. Thank you for that comment, Councilmember. Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Mr. Boylan for pointing out the public art. I worked for 6 years in the mayor's office, and so the city hall is in the same building as Ramsey County, and the third floor, the county, and the third floor is the city council chambers, and the county has a task force that is looking to replace the murals in there. So I don't know what the timeline is, but that'd be a really interesting thing to see when that's also done, and also in the basement of this building. There's a staff cafeteria area that's open to the public, and it has amazing art where there's art along the walls. It's made of glass, and I think it's sandblasted, and it's lit from behind. And so that's really, we're really lucky to have great public art in our public buildings.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember Lee. Further comments or questions on Mr. Boylan's report? Councilmember Vanko.
I want to do a shout out about the parks and trails in Ramsey County, and I am really grateful for it. I live in eastern Ramsey County, and particularly the Battle Creek Park is a gem in that area. And I also want to do a shout out for the Phelan Regional Park, having lived in that neighborhood as well. Many times we get lost on the east side in the park conversation because of Como and Hidden Falls and other gems, but the East Metro area is really blessed. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further comments or questions on the report? If not, Mr. Boylan has proposed that we authorize Ramsey County to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect and a series of advisements for the county. I would turn to any of the Ramsey County council members for a motion.
So moved.
Thank you, Councilmember Lee. Is there a second?
Well, second. I'll
Okay.
second that one.
It can only be one. Yeah. All right. Discussion on the motion. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Thank you, Mr. Boylan. Business item number 7 is 2020-15, the Livable Communities Act Tax-Based Revitalization Account Funding Recommendations. Marcus Martin will present on this. Welcome, Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to you all for putting this on your agenda today. I will start with a little bit of background about the program and then go into more details about the staff recommendation. So the purpose of the account is to clean up contamination for projects that will improve the tax base and add affordable housing or jobs. We also consider the highest public benefits for costs incurred and joint funding from our funding partners. We are governed and guided by three documents. Those are the Livable Communities Act, the Long Range Regional Plan, Thrive MSP 2040, and the Livable Communities Fund Distribution Plan. So think of the statute as kind of focusing on those grant-making elements that relate to kind of the source of funds, the distribution limits, some of the core funding goals, the long-range planning, looking at how we can meet the regional outcomes incrementally, so stewardship, prosperity, equity, livability, sustainability, looking ahead through to 2040. And then finally, the distribution plan focuses on how we'd like to distribute the funding annually. So each of the documents has a different timeline, slightly different focus. Just like we did in the spring, we offered 3 different funding categories. So if you think of the account, and then we divided that again into 3, there is the seeding equitable environmental development grants. Those are for project sites that do not have a project is not planned. It has not been identified. They're in or near an area of concentrated poverty, and they're looking for funding for kind of a more limited site investigation or a partial cleanup. So most of the requests we get in this category are typically for investigation activities. We also offer site investigation grants. Those are for expected developments that are thought to have contamination on their sites, but they need additional testing to find out what type of contaminants are on the site, where they are, what is the best remedy. So applicants that apply for this type of funding are generally in what people call due diligence phase of real estate development. And finally, the cleanup grants. The cleanup grants are intended for redevelopment projects that have already completed their investigation, and they're looking for public funding to help clean up the site. These are the projects that we know the most about, both in terms of the cleanup need itself and the development, the construction, or the adaptive reuse. So let's take a look at what we got here in this particular funding cycle. We received 18 applications totaling $6.4 million for projects in Edina, Falcon Heights, Minneapolis, New Brighton, Roseville, St. Paul, and West St. Paul. Most of the applications, as usual, were for cleanup, so 16 of those. We received 2 investigation requests. We did not receive any seed requests this time. We have just under $4 million to offer for all of the grant categories combined. So as I mentioned, $6.4 million was requested. The account is oversubscribed. This is an important condition for imposing funding limits that are required by statute. Let's take a look at the individual grant recommendations. So starting with the investigation, staff is recommending funding for 1 investigation application. This is located at 1222 University in the amount of $49,200. Next, let's look at the cleanup. We'll get back to the ones that are not being recommended later on. Staff is recommending 10 cleanup projects for funding. And I'll read through them. 14th and Central, $370,500. RBC Gateway, $425,000. Twin Lakes Station, $722,500. Amundsen Flats, $400,500. 907 Winter Street, Northeast, $185,000. Amber Apartments, $180,700. Stonehouse Square Apartments, $140,700. Creekside at Ben White, $367,000. Now this, I'm just going to pause for a moment here. This is one project that was affected by the statutory limits that we'll get to in a moment. Continuing, Waterford Bay, $316,900, and Stryker Avenue, $179,800. So let's look at those funding limits. So when the account is oversubscribed, when there's high demand for the funds, up to 50% can be awarded to a single community, and up to 75% of the funding can go to Minneapolis and St. Paul combined. So that limit can come from one higher cost project. It could come from multiple projects all added together. So in terms of this particular round, the amount recommended to the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, there is also that 75% limit, is 65% of the total available and 60% of the recommended amount. So that is below the 75% maximum. So this statutory limit has been met. And then looking at that single city limit, the amount recommended for all of the projects in the city of Minneapolis is also 50% of the total recommended amount. So this statutory limit has also been met. Any questions about the funding limits?
Questions, committee members? Oh, I'm sorry. Councilmember Lindstrom.
So the cities here are Minneapolis, St. Paul, Falcon Heights, Edina, West St. Paul, and maybe 1 or 2 others. Is that a typical breakout for cities that apply
Mr.
to these
Martins.
funds?
Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Martin.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, yes, we typically get a large number of applications from the central cities and from first ring suburbs, and then occasionally from what we would call suburban and emerging edge under Thrive. I personally, I'm very happy with the distribution. I thought it was very good, varied. It had a lot of different product types and a lot of different other factors too, with near transit, in a transit corridor, in areas of concentrated poverty, and so forth. So I'm very pleased.
Thank you, Councilmember Lindstrom.
And is that primarily because the outer areas of the region have less contamination?
Mr. Martin.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, that is correct, and also in the sense of the historical use. So contamination is like many things in that it doesn't respect necessarily property boundaries, political boundaries, and so it depends a lot on that use before, but contamination can also come from things that are very widespread. So gas stations, right? There's probably a gas station in everywhere you've ever been, somewhere. If it's very old, if it's been there for a very long time, there is some chance that that poses some environmental risk.
Councilmember Mento, questions on the statutory funding limit?
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What responsibility do the industries have for the contamination cleanup?
Mr. Martin.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, the responsibility in terms of, I'll focus on just for the grant program rather than overall. So in terms of the grant programs, what we look at is there a viable, responsible party that is clearly caused the contamination and have some recourse for paying for the contamination. What we take into account in addition to that, though, is if the new use. So, for example, there are many cases where a property could be contaminated. It has been, let's say, somewhat dealt with. The property, under the current rules, can continue to function as is. So let's say you had a tank, a leaking tank of some sort. You've plugged that leak. That leak is already into the ground. Maybe you don't have responsibility to chase that leak, but you can continue to use your property with that tank on it. But when it comes to redevelopment, which is the focus of our program here, what then that responsibility changes somewhat. As a new owner, a new person coming to that property, if you did not invest, work, move that land, dig that dirt, you didn't move it around, you don't have often responsibility for that. So in some cases then, there will be a chance where the private owner may clean it to a standard where they could continue to use it in the current use, but that may not be sufficient for whatever is planned for the future. And that's where the discussion of incentives comes into play.
Thank you.
Mr.
Councilmember
Chair,
Branto,
and Lisa, at some point, and it doesn't have to be immediate, but I think it would be interesting to have a conversation about what the metro region, communities, counties, townships, the Met Council can do to ensure that we continue these kinds of efforts to clean up, but that the entities responsible for the messes have their feet held to the fire. With the level of tax increment financing and other programs, I just find it pretty offensive that taxpayers are doing the cleanup that they should be doing. So I'd be interested in that being a topic at some point. I know that's pretty volatile and maybe would get us into trouble, but I think it just holds everybody accountable.
Thank you, Councilmember. I think we're ready to move on, Mr. Martin.
Thank you. So looking at the unfunded applications, the applications that staff is not recommending for funding, there are 7 of them, 1 investigation and 6 cleanup projects. Starting with 1345 Central Avenue, this is the investigation. The grant from one of our funding partners, Hennepin County, is likely to fund this one. So we are not recommending funding for it from this account at this time. two of the projects scored high enough to be considered for funding in our evaluation. That was the Amber Union in Falcon Heights and the Mosada in Minneapolis. That is a correction from the staff report that if you read through that was listed twice as both not recommended and not eligible, but it actually is eligible but not recommended. So I'll make that correction in the final copy. So in this case, there just wasn't enough funding to provide significant support for these two projects. In the case of Falcon Heights, or more specifically, but it also ran into that statutory funding limit in the case of Minneapolis. For the remaining projects, according to our grant criteria, cleanup projects must have an evaluation score of at least half, 75%. 75 points out of 150, I should say. The projects on your right did not score high enough to meet the minimum score to be recommended for funding. So the applicants are welcome to reapply for funding this spring if we continue the same schedule as we have this year. I have gotten a chance to talk with at least half of these here, and there is some interest in it. So if shown here are the cumulative benefits to the region if the staff recommendation is approved. After redevelopment, gains are expected in the tax base, jobs, housing units, including affordable units, as well as commercial and industrial space. And in closing, the staff recommendation to this committee, as listed in the business item, is that the Metropolitan Council award 11 tax-based revitalization account grants, as shown in Table 1 of the business item, and authorize its Community Development Division Director to execute the grant agreements on behalf of the Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Questions on that report? Councilmember Alice Ingebrigtsen.
Thank you. I think one thing that would be interesting, not necessarily for right now today, but going forward when we see these, is it possible to receive aggregated data by geography of the history of the grant program or some period of time? I'm curious about where just the geography of where these grants are being used. And it'd be interesting to see an overlay of communities that have known significant issues, and are the grants going to areas where those pervasive issues with contamination and pollution are. I was just reminding myself, man, 2 weeks off and you get rust. So I was reminding myself of some information we received not too long ago, even I think it even was in December, around just the amount of pollution that in particular people of color, indigenous people, and low-income people are exposed to. And I just wonder if it makes sense for us to be kind of monitoring and seeing how we're doing at overlapping these grants with those areas. If hotspot's the right word, I'm not sure, but does that make sense?
Mr. Martin?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, yes, that does make sense. I will just offer to you that it is somewhat difficult to have a comprehensive inventory of pollution.
Sure.
The exposure levels and so forth. But we certainly can provide more information.
Thank you. Further questions on the report? Councilmember Lindstrom.
I was disappointed to see that the Amber Union project isn't moving forward. It's 120 units of affordable housing right on the A line. Seems like a great project. And I'm wondering if, I guess a couple of things. One, you said they're invited to apply next spring. Did I hear you correctly?
Mr. Martin?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Yes, the applicants are welcome to reapply.
And that would be for funding a year from now, essentially around this time. 2021, is that right? Or is there another round in the spring of funding that goes out?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, we offer the funding twice annually. Typically, if we continue that practice, we would be available to apply sometime in May, and awards would be made sometime in late June.
Okay.
So there would be an opportunity for that project.
Thanks. And if I may, Mr. Chair, do you know for the projects that did not receive funding, are any of them applying through different sources of livable community categories? or is it just this one?
Mr. Martin.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, just for clarification, in terms of the funding, you're referring to other non-council sources? Is that correct?
No, council sources like.
Oh, I see.
you know.
It's the other livable communities accounts.
Exactly. Right.
I see.
Yeah.
I see. In that particular case, they did not. I understand that project involves some bond financing. It will also have state and national historic credits. Part of the reason for waiting on the recommendation was that those sources are not committed yet. They have a large amount of bonding that they would like to request. There is potentially some interest in requesting funding for support from Minnesota Housing too. So those are great unknowns at this point, but I think there is time to resolve those.
And one just,
Councilmember Lindstrom.
one just follow up, just in general. I'm wondering the projects that were above 75 but didn't receive funding. Well, at least with the Amber Union project, I'm thinking, and I don't recall exactly, but I'm thinking that there's probably a lot of asbestos in that old building that's there right now. And is it accurate to say, in general, that the projects that did not receive funding are not quote unquote bad enough of a contaminated site? Like if they were more contaminated, then they would score higher? Is that accurate to say or not
Mr.
accurate
Martin.
to say?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, that is one of the factors that we look at, certainly. The sites that are the most contaminated do receive the most credit, the ones that would present the highest risk to individuals, and that would be the cleanest after completion. You're correct that in that case of that particular site, most of the contamination is related to interior building materials in the building, asbestos and some lead-based paint, most of which is in good condition and somewhat would be more concerned if affected by the construction redevelopment inside, interior redevelopment, I should say. So I think in the case of, but however, it is not the only factor. So I think it is still a viable project for our funding, given a different competitors and at a different time with more certainty about the financing.
So it's kind of a good news, bad news scenario. It's like, good news, your site isn't very contaminated. Bad news, you don't get the money. At least this round.
I have in queue council members Atlas, Ingerbritsen, Chambliss, and Wolf. Councilmember Atlas, Ingerbritsen.
Thank you, Chair. I thought I would just share a question that I asked, kind of sidebar to regarding reviewing of the rubrics. I think we've had a couple of things that have come up over the last several months where we're, curious as to why something doesn't get through, and so I was just asking. When we meet to review rubrics, we'll be looking at all the different rubrics, and that answer was yes. And so I think that that's one place where it would probably be good for us to retain some of the projects that we were that didn't make it, so that we could ask, how did that not fit the rubric, so we can be critical and thoughtful in our thinking about them. And then projects that did and why they were successful, so that we can be thoughtful, and that's the big opportunity that we have to just make sure that it's working the way that we're all hoping that it is.
Thank you for that point. Yeah, this is an interesting list because there isn't a big drop off at the end. There isn't a big bubble in the list. So I'm sure it took a lot of analysis and discussion to come up with this recommendation. Further questions on the report, Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, my question was partially answered by Councilmember Lindstrom as far as the Amundsen Flats. I was curious about those projects where they were not eligible due to the cost being too high for the particular grant. And then there was the discussion that there are other sources of income, so that did really help. And then also that they have a chance to apply again. With that, are we going back to those who didn't make the cut to say, these are potential ways to close the gap in terms of funding?
Mr. Martin.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I do offer that they may reapply for the funding. If I have known of another source, I will give that referral as well, if they have not already noted that's available for them.
Okay, thank
And
you.
then, Councilmember Chavez, was the first part of your question, was that about the impact of the statutory limitations
No.
on this? Okay, thank you. I misunderstood. Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was looking through the detailed things in the staff report, and the Stonehouse Square apartments, it says that it's an existing building and they found the mess putting in drain tile. That's not a normal thing. Usually we have, something's being totally torn down and redone or whatever, or the building is being reused for something else. What happened there? And how old is that building, and why did they miss the contamination before?
Mr. Martin.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee. So in that case, yes, that is a preservation project is how we would look at that. Those are occupied, affordable units. So we want to help support, keep people in those units. The work that in question, the drain tile, has not been put in yet. And so this is the issue, that when they have problems with localized flooding in that area, and so they need this drain tile, but in order to put that in, that's where they discovered that they have a significant amount of contaminated soils. That is not unusual for an area that has a long history of industrial use, particularly kind of closer to the riverfront, like that project is. So part of it is, again, that aspect of if in health terms, it's a question of what is the risk to the inhabitants depending on where it is. So if it is below a certain distance, it's very unlikely, for example, that you'll go out and dig 5 feet down in your apartment building, down there. And so there's very little risk depending on the contaminant affecting you. It depends on the type, of course. So that's what happened in this case. So in this case now they do have to dig. So they're exposing that risk where it was not a risk before. And so now it has to be dealt with.
Okay.
Thank you. Further questions from Mr. Martin on his report? Further questions? Seeing none, Mr. Martin has brought us a recommendation that we award 11 tax-based revitalization account grants and authorize the Community Development Division Director to execute the grant agreements on our behalf. Is there a motion to approve?
Move approval.
Thank you. Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Thank you, Mr. Martin, for your work and for your report. And our final business item, number 8, is 2020-16. We'll be seeing this week in the full Met Council meeting. It's adoption of the Livable Communities Act Affordable and Life Cycle Housing Goals for 2011 to 2020 for Little Canada. And Ms. Beard will present on this. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you stated, I'm Tara Beard. I'm the manager of the Livable Communities Unit in Community Development. And as you may also be aware, participation in the Livable Communities Act programs is voluntary and predicated on a couple of statutory requirements, including the adoption of affordable and life cycle housing goals. We do that on a decennial basis following other cycles you're familiar with, the comp plan process, and forecasting and allocation of affordable housing need. But a community that hasn't enrolled en masse with all of the communities at those decennial touch points is still eligible to apply and join the program on an annual basis. So I say all that because this year you'll be hearing a lot about the re-enrollment process for the 2021 to 2030 Livable Communities Act participation re-enrollment. This is actually for the City of Little Canada to be able to participate in the 2011 to 2020 cycle that we are wrapping up right now for livable communities, which would allow them to be eligible to apply for funds this coming year, 2020. So we currently have 96 communities that participate in the Livable Communities Act programs. The 3 requirements to participate are the adoption of affordable and life cycle housing goals, that a housing action plan is established to address how a community intends to meet those goals, and that a community spend an affordable and life cycle housing opportunity amount, which is calculated as defined in statute, toward creating affordable and life cycle housing opportunities. The most recent addition to the program, I believe, was 2 years ago, or maybe just one, City of Shakopee. Becoming a Livable Communities Act participating community also requires a couple other details: that the local government pass a resolution by November 15th of any year. So for re-enrollment in the coming decade, we'll see a lot of communities adopting affordable and life cycle housing goals for the 2021 decade before November 15th of 2020. Little Canada did adopt, prior to November 15th, 2019, affordable and life cycle housing goals to participate. And the resolution includes the documentation that they elect to participate in the program, agree to the goals, and commit to spending their affordable and life cycle housing amount annually. Next, the council holds a public hearing, which was opened in December and closed towards the end of the month. And then the council has to adopt a resolution of the negotiated goals for all newly participating communities by January 15th of each year. That's why this is on a same week cycle, so it can get in front of the council before the 15th. So the City of Little Canada has passed a resolution electing to participate, agrees to its affordable and life cycle housing goals, which are consistent with Housing Council's policies, and commits toward contributing toward its affordable and life cycle housing goals. And the proposed action is that the Metropolitan Council approve the attached resolution 2020-1, perhaps I should say, adopting the Livable Communities Act Local Housing Incentives Account Affordable and Life Cycle Housing Goals by the City of Little Canada to participate in the Livable Communities Act for calendar year 2020.
Thank you, Ms. Beard. Questions on that report? Any questions? Seeing none, I'm rapidly trying to figure out whose district this is in. Oh, all district. All district. All right. So I would turn to Councilmember Menville.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I'd like to move approval.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Discussion on that report? Any discussion? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Thank you, Ms. Beard, for your work and for your report. We'll now move into our information items on our agenda, and the first is the Parks and Trails Legacy 25-year plan overview, and Mr. Mullen is here to present. Welcome. Happy New Year.
Thanks, Mr. Chair and committee members. I'm Emmett Mullen. I'm the Regional Parks Manager in the Community Development Division. And today I'm going to provide an overview of the Parks and Trails Legacy 25-year plan. But first, I just wanted to give you a little background. So some of you may remember the passage of the Clean Water, Land, and Legacy Amendment in 2008. This was a really big deal because it was passed to increase sales tax at the time of a recession. But people, I think, really believed in it, and it passed at a very high margin. There are 4 funds included in the Legacy Amendment. There's Clean Water, Habitat, Arts and Culture, and then the most important one, the Parks and Trails Legacy, also the smallest. But since its inception in 2009, there have been over $200 million directed to the Metropolitan Regional Park System. So it's a really significant funding source for our regional park system. Many people have called it a game changer for our regional park system. There are 3 primary entities that are involved in the implementation of it. The Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, they manage the state Parks and Trails system. The Greater Minnesota Regional Parks and Trails Commission, they manage the outstate regional park system, and then the Metropolitan Regional Park System. And here are our 10 regional park implementing agencies. These are the people that actually own and operate the regional park system. Just to place the Parks and Trails Legacy grant program in context, this is a slide I've used in a previous presentation to you, but it is one of 5 regional park system funding programs, and a very significant one at that. The Parks and Trails Legacy Fund, a really important takeaway for this presentation is that the Metropolitan Council is the fiscal steward of the Legacy Fund. and we pass 100% of these funds through to those 10 regional park implementing agencies as directed by law. I was talking to Councilmember Atlas Ingebretson about this pie chart because it's a little complicated, but let me just tell you two really important things about it. The fund is statutorily directed, so right off the top, 10% of the fund is directed to the Park Acquisition Opportunity Fund program. The remaining 90% is directed through a funding formula that includes non-local visits, the particular jurisdiction's population, and then the percent proportion of the operation and maintenance expenditures of the particular jurisdiction. So that's the formula that gets it out the door. The fund supports the implementation of the Regional Parks Policy Plan and the 4 pillars, which I'm going to get into in just a minute. I wanted to mention an action that the 2019 state legislature took. And the early history of the Parks and Trails funding was the funding split that the state legislature made was one of kind of acrimony and conflict. The Parks and Trails Legacy Fund was it was a point of conflict where the DNR, Greater Minnesota, and the Metro Regional implementing agencies, there was just a lot of fighting at the council. So back in 2011, the legislature directed the creation of a consensus recommendation among the 3 principal entities, DNR, Greater Minnesota, and us. And we came up with a 40-40-20 funding recommendation that has carried for 4 biennia, so 8 years. Now there is a return to the table, and that's what this slide is about. So the 2019 state legislature said, go back to the table, put together a 9-person funding work group, and come up with a new funding recommendation, which needs to be presented by no later than June 15th for the governor's consideration in the fiscal year 2022 and 2023 budget and potentially beyond. So hold your hats. We'll keep you posted. So that was really just a little bit of context to set up now the Parks and Trails Legacy Plan. So here's a picture of the plan that was created in 2011, and it still has a lot of gravitas and importance for the direction of how this fund is spent. The plan has a really big vision, and the Parks and Trails vision for Minnesotans and residents of our region is really that by the time that the fund is set to expire in 2035, our world-class parks and trails connect everyone to the outdoors. They create experiences that inspire a legacy of stewardship for the natural world, and they provide fun outdoor recreation opportunities that strengthen friendships, families, health, and spirit now and into the future. So it was, I thought, a really important vision that this plan sets. There are 4 primary strategic directions that really make up the heart of the plan, and they are connecting people in the outdoors. That's the first one. The second one is acquiring land and developing opportunities, then taking care of the existing system, taking care of what we have, and then coordinating among the partners that provide those recreational opportunities. So as an aside, I was involved in the creation of this plan. I was working for the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources at the time, and there was a real high bar set for public participation with this plan. And, you know, there were a lot of groups out there that were saying, oh, we need to focus this entire fund on just that land acquisition, or we need to, before we spend a penny, we really need to make sure that the existing system is in great shape. And I think that what ultimately transpired with this plan is that the Legacy Fund needs to to support the whole array of park and trail opportunities. And so that's what I think this plan really provides, is that framework for thinking about how to create a world-class system. So now I'm going to just walk through those 4 pillars and then open it up for questions. But the first strategic direction of the plan is connecting people in the outdoors. And the idea for this pillar was really, it emerged in the early 2000s with the concern that about declining outdoor recreation participation, particularly around declining participation among youth. And this was troubling news, and the plan really wanted to do something about it. It identified a broad array of target markets, including youth, young adults, families and children, people of diverse racial and ethnic backgrounds, people of all abilities, new immigrants, and older adults, kind of everyone but older white men. We're doing pretty well. The plan had a real focus, though, on children, and I just wanted to call that out, viewing them as the pathway to the future. This photo in the plan is of the Lake Elmo Park Reserve swim pond, which was a legacy project. But what I wanted to focus on was that the Washington County created these public service announcements in 4 different languages. Which was really innovative, and that was paid for with legacy funds. Additionally, they created an electronic sign at the gate of the Lake Elmo Park Reserve, which presents important information in 4 languages also. So it was a good creative use. The second pillar is around acquiring land and developing opportunities. This first picture is of Coney Island, which is in Carver County, which I'm sure Councilmember Wolf remembers. This was a 34-acre island that Carver County purchased with the help of the Parks and Trails Legacy Fund. The second part of this is developing opportunities, so capital improvements. This is Eastman Nature Center at Elm Creek Park Reserve in western Hennepin County. But an amazing new redevelopment, because it was kind of an old, tired nature center, and it's got great environmental benefits in terms of how it uses energy and whatnot, but also a really engaging design that is really attractive to bring people out. The third pillar is around taking care of what we have, and I want to just focus that there's both a capital development side of taking care of what we have, as well as a natural resources side. This photo shows picture of Bede-Makaska, part of the chain of lakes. There was a huge push a couple of years ago with the Minneapolis Park Board investing in curb cuts, improving road crossings, and removing barriers to those trails, because there were a lot of missing accessibility components. Another one I didn't create a direction of, but the Minneapolis Park Board is using legacy funds to fund the master planning for Minnehaha Parkway. All you hear in the news is, are people going to be able to continue to drive on the parkway? Which they are. That's what the Park Board has directed. This is a plan that's still in process. But what I wanted to call out is that it is a really exciting and bold environmental stewardship. They're making a lot of recommendations for really restoring that creek, which isn't in great shape. The fourth and final pillar is around coordinating among partners. This one, as I said, is around how we work together. This slide is a picture of this joint website that DNR, Greater Minnesota, and the Metropolitan Regional folks, and Minute, the IT group, worked on. And it's sort of a one-stop shop for finding state and regional parks and trails opportunities across Minnesota. It was a great example. The other one I wanted to call out is the Parks and Trails Legacy Advisory Committee, which is a 17-member citizen board that broadly oversees the implementation of the Parks and Trails Legacy Plan. Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen was the first chair of that group and really helped it get its feet on the ground. The final slide I have today is just the Legislative Coordinating Commission. This is the Minnesota legislature oversees sort of the reporting on the legacy fund, and this is where you can go for project level information on all projects around the legacy fund. So broadly, the habitat, clean water, arts and culture, but also the parks and trails one. And it's a great place to go and find project level information. So that is my high level overview. This is a really important plan as well as a funding source for our state and our metropolitan regional park system. And in partnership with Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen, we just wanted people to know about it because this plan has really been used, it is being used, and it will continue to be. So,
Thank you, Mr. Mullen. Questions for Mr. Mullen on that report? Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say my quick comment that legacy funding funds Metropolitan Regional Arts Commission, and at my day job, our building is right next door to them, and I've sat on their grant review panels before, and they do incredible work too. And I'm not trying to be funny, but what happens in 2034? What happens to your job and our regional parks?
Mr. Mullen.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Lee, the fund will expire, and so that's a great question because it's possible that they will renew the sales tax that will fund these important uses, but unless we continue to work on public awareness of the benefits of the fund, it'll be a harder sell because sales tax increases are never very popular. And so we really have an important job to do to talk about what this fund is for and how we're using it wisely.
Thank you. Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen and Councilmember Wolf.
Thanks, Chair. I have more of a kind of some comments as opposed to a question, but I think that was a really great question, Councilmember Lee. We have work to do as the body that is the stewards for the legacy funds for the metropolitan area. That's what we approve. And I think sometimes people think of regional parks as this big park that's way out there nobody goes to, but they don't think of regional parks are Worth Park. It's a neighborhood park. Shingle Creek Parkway and Weber Park, regional park. Phelan, regional, those are neighborhood parks. They're parks people walk out their door, walk across the street, and walk into. And the ability for those parks to be spaces that growing demographics see themselves in and therefore feel a stronger connection to nature and a stronger connection to self as well is really important. So I think there's two big things. As being the first chair for the advisory committee, that was what introduced me to the Met Council, was coming here to testify on behalf of our efforts and understandings. And there are two big concerns for legacy funds. One is not so impactful for our aspect of it, but at the state aspect, so the DNR, it's the surplanting, it's the use of funds, decrease in funding for the DNR, and then the use of these funds to surplant. When these funds are meant to be increases in innovation and the intent was to improve what we were doing. So that's one big issue that people are thinking about. The second big issue is something that we're still really battling, and that's the utilization across those four pillars. The first pillar being connecting people to the outdoors, and this is what brought me to the Met Council and to the state legislature to testify multiple times, is that we're not seeing the same amount of investment. So we hear about it all the time here at our table that we need more programs. In our own research at the council, in conversations at the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission, so MPOSC, that I'm the liaison to for us, that there's a desire for more marketing and more programming. Those are what we know. The wonderful thing is that this 25-year plan really reinforces that. This is things we've known for so long. And I'll just read their target markets are identified based on statistical research and shows key areas of declining of underrepresented populations in the outdoors as well-known areas, key areas for growth in Minnesota's population over the next 25 years. So those populations that are in most of our counties, 100% of our growth coming from are those populations who are not connecting. And those markets are youth, but they also include young adults. Young adults from all communities aren't going into the outdoors as much. Families with children. At the time when I was on the advisory council, I was also the manager of Richardson Nature Center. And I can't tell you how many times I had a young mom with kids who may have got a little turned around on our trails because we didn't have great signage, but didn't have, because of the typography of that area, the geography, we didn't have good cell phone reception. And the terror when she thought she was lost. And that happened a number of times, surprisingly enough. And that hesitancy to get out into the outdoors is definitely there for families, racial and ethnic minorities, new immigrants, and older adults. And a big part of that is the accessibility of so many of our spaces as people age, needing to have more forgiving trails perhaps, or other resources that aid in accessing facilities. So I think one thing I'd like to ask all of you, I won't ask you for, I'll ask you for tons of things, I'm not gonna lie. But I'd really love, this is a plan that was put together so well. It's so rare that we have something where we take the time to talk to people, and people we're connected with across the state. Young people, diverse people, old people, all kinds of people. It was really an amazing plan to see put together, and it's so high quality. If we don't accomplish what's there, I think it's really going to be hard in 2034 to say we deserve more. And right now, there's a major part of the work that we are not investing in. The last report I saw aggregated that data. It was less than 9% of the resources went to non-capital investments. And that's a fourth. If you look at the 4 pillars, that should be a fourth of the investment. So we know we hear it here. That's an opportunity. I would take a look at that plan. There's a lot of wonderful research and information in it. It is 81 pages, but it is really worth it. And frankly, I think it's kind of an easy read. So.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion on Mr. Mullins' report, Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to follow up on Councilmember Lee's question as well, with that information that Councilmember Atlas Ingebretson talked about, this supplementing, not supplanting. That's been actually a big issue in the metro as well, because state law says that the legislature is supposed to fund 40% of the operations and maintenance costs for the regional park agencies, the 10 agencies, and the highest it ever got was 17%, and it's been dropping ever since. We're down at like 9, 10 now. So it has definitely supplanted rather than supplemented the operations and maintenance funding for the metro area. That's a big problem when the agencies themselves are paying for 90% of their operations and maintenance costs for a regional system, and people don't realize how many people use our system versus using the state park system. The regional system has at least 4 times as many visitors annually as the state park system does. So, I mean, that's something that needs to be part of the discussion when you decide that 40-40-20 or something else split, but people don't want to think about that. Our state parks are mostly well developed but old, and they're not accessible to disabled people. That's their biggest issue, but we have large parts of our park system that don't have anything. I mean, there's a couple parks in Dakota County that don't have hardly anything or nothing at all on them. There's parks in Scott County that are the same way. So the needs are different within our systems. There's a lot in Minneapolis that is being maintained because it's been there for a while, but there's other parts of our system that just don't have anything, and so they're using the money to put things in so that people can actually go to the park. that was just my 2 cents.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion on the report, Councilmember Essingerupson and Councilmember Lindstrom.
I just wanted to say thank you for sharing that. That was not the lens that I brought, and I think that's really important because those are the things that people are going to nitpick around, and it's, you know, what's the benefit, but it's also, it happens in other sectors too, not just in parks, but it is something where we have to think about what we pay for as a standard of what we want, not just having this become something that then takes place for what we should have and protect regardless. And I think that's even more important because of our climate issues and the need to increase conservation. And I think it's just easy for us growing up here. I think we, you know, all spent a lot of our lives here to take for granted these facilities and these in this natural space. And it is disappearing around the world, but it's disappearing here too. As we watch the comp plans, I'm looking at the existing plans versus the future. And as I've looked, more often than not, I'm seeing less and less zoned for green space. And that's really worrisome to me. So I just think it's important. I just want to encourage us not to take it for granted and to really think of this as a serious part of our work at the council, not just kind of the parks. So.
Thank you. Further discussion on the Parks and Trail Legacy 25-year plan overview report. Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was thinking about the 9-person work group, and I'm wondering, are you one of the 9? And if so, how have you started to meet yet? I know you have to present a report by June or so. Hopefully, we'll be right around the corner, right? Maybe not quite, but getting there.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Lindstrom, I am not one of the 9. I am what's known as a Parks and Trails Legacy Liaison, along with the State Park Director, Erica Rivers, and Renee Matson, who's the Greater Minnesota Executive Director. And we are supporting a team of people who are going to come together to make this recommendation. Our chair helped select the 3 representatives that we have. We have Mary Jo McGuire, who's a Ramsey County Commissioner, Mary Merrill, who's a former Minneapolis Park Board Superintendent, and John Gunyu, who is the current board chair for Three Rivers Park District. So we have a really strong team, collaborative team, but I think they'll carry Councilmember Wolf's message. So.
Thank you. Right. Further discussion, Councilmember Essingerupson.
It'd be nice to know what that team, what the diversity beyond the recommendations we made, but what that broader team, how they reflect the populations that we're working within the growing populations and gender diversity as well. I don't know if it's possible to find that out, but that would be nice to know.
The DNR's 3 representatives are Assistant Commissioner Shannon Lotthammer, the Phil Leversedge, who's the Deputy Park Director, and Scott Kelling, who's the Northeast Regional Manager. And Greater Minnesota, it is Rick Anderson from Lyon County. You know Rick. Marcia Baird from the City of Bemidji Park Manager, and Mark Angrave. He works with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, but he is a district commissioner in the Northwest District. So.
Okay, thank you.
Well done, Mr. Moore.
Yeah, that was impressive.
The first meeting is Friday, and I'm trying to get ready for it.
Good job. Great. Further discussion on Mr. Mohn's report. Further discussion? Seeing none, thanks very much for reporting on this.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our next information item is a status update on 24 comprehensive plan reviews. That'll be given by Angela Torres. Ms. Torres, welcome. And I will say, and I've said this before in this setting and in the full council, this is a lot of work to get. I mean, I can imagine the work that you guys are doing, and it's a big part of our agendas here, but it's been really helpful early in our term to review all of these comprehensive plans. And I know I have learned so much about the broader region, the reviewing all of these. So what's our status, Ms. Torres?
Thank you, council member and committee members. My name is Angela Torres. I'm the manager of local planning assistance. You've seen me many times, I'm sure. But all of the comprehensive plans do go through local planning assistance, and you've heard 6 tonight. So as Councilmember Lilligren was saying, it is a great deal of work. My short presentation doesn't really do it justice, but I'm hoping to provide you some context around the work that we are doing. So this again is just a bit of a recap, big picture overview. You might remember that we started with preliminary plan reviews. We did 94 of those for communities that chose to do that, was not mandatory. We have 69 grant contracts that benefit 104 of the region's communities. These funds will assist in completion of 84 plans of the 168 plans that we will be reviewing. We have 60 communities that requested extensions to the December 31st, 2018 deadline that the council authorized. The maximum amount of extension that a community could request was 1 year, so all of those extensions have passed. So you may see a few that have gone past that, but we are working diligently with them to provide assistance and get their plans into us for review. This map identifies all of the communities that have submitted plans for review. This map, shown in green, identifies all of the work that you have done to authorize plans on behalf of the council. So there are 76 authorized plans. That doesn't include the 10 townships in Scott County. That's because the county does the planning for those townships. So we don't count those as individuals because it was one plan, but still 76 authorized plans almost gets us at 50%. We're not quite there, but close. Give us another couple meetings. So the total plans, as I mentioned, 168. Plans that we have received to date are 151, and of that 151, 20 plans are in process, and that means the 15 business day review period that all plans adhere to are represented in those 20 plans. 42 are incomplete currently. That means that a response has been sent to the community, that additional information is required in order to reach completeness, but that the council has received and reviewed an initial plan. 13 plans are complete and are scheduled for committee meetings, and you'll see those on upcoming agendas. 76 are authorized, which I want to point at again because that is an accomplishment. It's a tremendous amount of work. And we have also received, of those 76, we've received 33 of the final plans that have been adopted then by the local governments. So once the council authorizes a plan, the local jurisdiction then has to adopt by resolution that plan and submit that final adopted plan to us with that resolution for our files, and then they can start amending their plan, which you've seen some of those amendments as well. Then there are 17 outstanding plans. I mentioned that as we were talking about the extensions. 7 of those are from grant communities. The sector representatives for those communities are really working diligently to try and get communities to a point where they feel comfortable in submitting that plan to us. So we are in constant communication with those. The number used to be higher, and we're ticking them off one by one. So that's the big picture numbers, the quantification of it. But we have started to look at what comes out of the comp plans. There's a lot of information across the region, a lot of different types of communities, a lot of different planning challenges, and we're starting to identify some of the things that we've seen across many plans. And I just wanted to touch base on a few of those things, give updates. Some of them you have heard about before. They won't be new: housing, economic competitiveness, and some others. But I wanted to let you know where we're at right now in reviewing some of those. So of 135 comprehensive plans reviewed, that includes both preliminary and original submissions, 50% of those communities have either an economic competitiveness or an economic development chapter in those plans. And when we look at the economic competitiveness, economic element of that plan, what we're seeing is statistics, kind of like an existing conditions analysis, inventory of those conditions and trends for that community, some sort of assessment of those current conditions. Many chapters outline economic goals, economic competitiveness goals and related policies, in addition to or instead of a more formal inventory of current conditions. Here, this graphic shows kind of where those are distributed throughout the region, and you'll see that 37 have economic competitiveness chapters and 31 have economic development chapters. As we're talking about climate change and resilience and sustainability, we've looked at 141 of those plans so far. 132 of those plans are considered complete for the required solar element of comprehensive plans. You can see here that 37 have identified a climate action plan, which is a really concerted effort to identify implementation actions regarding climate change. You can see too on this graphic that there are many ways, much terminology, lots of different ways of framing the conversation, and communities are trying a lot of different ways of tackling this issue and bringing information in their comprehensive plans around resilience, sustainability, and climate. Right now, we have seen that just over a third, 37%, go beyond that solar resilience element requirement and are including these other identified elements, whether that's energy planning or some of these other things. On this graphic as well,
Ms. Trust, we have a question from Councilmember Lindstrom.
Yes.
Just a quick clarification on this slide. So when they say climate action plan, or when you say climate action plan or energy plan, these are plans that the cities intend to do. Is that correct? Not that they already have, or not that are incorporated into the current comp plan. It's what they intend to do. Is that correct?
Ms. Torres.
Chair Lilligren and committee members, it's a mix of both. Some of them have already worked through some climate action planning efforts. Others have the intention of doing so, have maybe a structure and foundation around that conversation, and intend to do more over time, but it's a mix of both. And you'll see too that some of these are overlapping. They may have energy planning in their comprehensive plan as well as a climate action plan. They may have a resilience chapter as well as or that encompasses many of these other things.
Thank you.
Does that help? Okay.
Yes, thanks.
Thank you.
And some of these other, if I could just quick follow up, some of these other things like Green Step, I suspect they already are a Green Step cities, not that they intend to be. And same with Soul Smart, they probably already received designation as a Soul Smart community, not that they intend to be.
Ms. Torres.
Councilmember
Maybe I'm wrong about
Lilligren
that.
and committee members, yes and. So we do have some goals and policies where the community will identify. We're going to coordinate with our solar advisor, and Cameron Bailey is our solar advisor for the council, and he works diligently with the communities to try and get more. We're never satisfied with just the number of communities that are part of these programs, but it's yes and. So you'll see many communities that are already part of both of those programs, and they'll identify that in their plan, but others that are tiptoeing into the conversation, and one way to do that is accessing the free technical assistance and the resources that the council can offer in order to get them to a point where they're eligible for those communities.
Thank you.
Thank you. Question from Councilmember Atlas-Singer-Bretson.
Thank you, Chair. I think one of the things that would be helpful is treating things kind of to get to a place where we can really have good information is to kind of separate those things out. So we know communities that are there, communities that aren't there, and communities that are making those efforts to get there. Because you can be making the efforts to get there for a long time and never get there, or have the intention or say this is a goal of ours. It just, I think, would be help us have a more accurate picture if we saw those separated out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Torres.
I wanted to add one additional clarification on the resource conservation
bar that's on this graphic. This is primarily related to the natural resources, goals, policies, and strategies, most of which are found in the land use chapters of the comp plans. It's not directly related to the resilience or climate change element of a plan, but it's more so a proxy for how communities are still caring about the natural environment and identifying goals, policies, and strategies. And it's part of this overall broader conversation. It does feed into the climate change and resilience components, although it might not be directly related to that. And we use this information, this tracking that we're doing, to talk about how we're going to provide additional technical assistance to communities and how we may offer more assistance to enrollment in some of these other programs and that kind of thing. So we use this to do our work planning as well. This is the first time I'm reporting out a little bit about the equity components that we have been tracking in our comprehensive plans. Council staff reviewed the authorized plans, 75 as of December 11th, so already a little lagging behind, but over half of the plans mentioned equity terms throughout the body of the plan. 29 plans explicitly mention equity in their goals or policies, and 13 plans state equity as a guiding principle and or have a chapter dedicated specifically to addressing equity. There is some overlap in the communities that mention equity in the goals and policies and those that use that as a guiding principle, because obviously they're both related. So the numbers reflect that. There is a variation in the way the communities frame equity in some of their conversations, and this is how we're seeing interesting approaches that we can share with other communities. Every community has a different political background for every community, right? And some may be more or less able to push certain items forward. So what we're seeing is that sometimes communities are framing it as social equity, sometimes it's very explicit as racial equity, sometimes it's health equity, all of which have direct impacts on the people in the communities, and all of which can be an effective way of forwarding the equity conversation in that community.
Mr. Question from Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm really happy to see that we're able to look at this equity portion of the 2040 comprehensive plans. It's a start, and so that establishes the baseline for how we can measure progress, interest, and how things are changing over time. I know that in some of the cities that are in my district, they didn't exist until the last 2-3 years, and sharing that information with other cities to see how they can benefit and get on board. I think that's great. So I'm glad to see that we're doing that as a council.
Thank you. Ms. Torres.
So I wanted to give 2 examples of how communities have approached equity in their plans. The city of Maplewood takes an approach where they state equity as a guiding principle for its plan. They use this as a framework for the policies and action items laid out in individual chapters. And the plan identifies the city's, in its discussion, the city's hopes that this approach will help identify and address obstacles and disparities that lead to inequities within the community. So then throughout the plan, the city uses a designated icon and then identifies within each of the chapters where that icon is being implemented, where that takes an action in order to move that issue forward. And for Maplewood's plan, the icon appears in most chapters throughout the plan elements. And as I said, we have many different ways of framing equity, and for the city of Osceo's plan, they are talking about it through a health equity lens. So they have 5 health themes, and one of those themes is social health and equity. And the city uses this element to identify and address barriers to equity in order to promote the health and well-being of all of its residents, regardless of age, race, income, etc. And Osseo also uses that icon to help address throughout the plan where the goals and policies are tackling that health and equity component. For some county examples, both Washington County and Anoka County have equity integrated throughout their entire plan. So some have it as a standalone or as a tagged item, others integrated it throughout all of the plan. So I want to talk about housing. This is the first time I've reported out a little bit about housing as well. Many communities have noted that they want to investigate their own local 4D program, and two communities in particular, Oakdale and the city of Belle Plaine, have already reached out to our technical staff and have been requesting information on how to do that. I will very poorly explain what a 4D program is, and if there's any follow-up questions, I may ask Tara Beard, who is in the audience, to help me out. 4D is a way for any community, small or large, where they can forfeit a little bit of the tax capacity to allow naturally occurring affordable housing rentals to maintain their current low rents and get access to some rehabilitation funds. So that can either be some nominal funding from the community that leverages programs or other organizations, or a big program locally. So exploration of those 4D programs is something that we're starting to see many, many communities identify as part of their housing implementation efforts. I'll pause in case anybody has any questions on the 4D program.
I think you're good, Ms. Torres.
Okay,
Please continue.
perfect. I did it, Tara.
Good
Okay.
job.
Another portion where we're finding communities really talking about a new policy or an implementation measure is accessory dwelling units. We learned that many communities, large to small, urban to rural, kind of across the region, already have some sort of ADU policy on the books, which is not something that we would necessarily know about. It tends to be a much more localized zoning effort, and that's not something that the council is always in the loop about, but the comprehensive plans allow us an opportunity to learn this from our communities, and then we can provide assistance to communities as they start developing those programs, connecting them with others that are doing some of the similar things. Another housing takeaway that we've identified is around aging in place and accessible housing. Many communities wrote in their plans about a need for aging in place or senior housing in creative ways. So accessible housing to people with both physical and mental disabilities in both areas of new construction and rehab is going to have a huge piece of this, as many seniors already are struggling with some sort of ability challenge. Some counties have existing programs, so there's space for cities to step into this area, especially as it relates to social connections with aging communities. And environmentally sensitive and green housing. Many communities, again, large to small, urban to rural, have mentioned a need for housing that does not negatively impact the environment, or strong preference to use their local housing tools like TIF and bonding authority for green housing efforts. There's a lot of good work in planning assistance that we can provide to communities that could build upon this local political will. So this is, again, just a few of the initial takeaways. We are tracking other things as well that I'm not sure I have a great grasp of how to report out on yet. For example, when the Land Use Advisory Committee and the, you might have to help me with the appropriate acronym here, Metropolitan Area MOSAC.
Water Supply Advisory Committee.
Yeah, Advisory Committee met just recently. The ES staff there shared how their staff, their interns, are tracking groundwater in showing up, groundwater discussions showing up in local surface water management plans, and how wellhead protection is showing up in local water supply plans. Both of which speak to an integrated water planning approach that's encouraged in the Council's Master Water Supply Plan. And so then, as of the beginning of December, the ES staff have reviewed 139 of the 168 plans. With some of these things as the initial steps into, they have much more technical takeaways too. That's really high level, but there are other technical working units that are also investigating, and we will be reporting out on those in the future as well. There is what we would call a comp plan composite that we will deliver to. That's something that would also include land use, the new regional land use landscape, and we would provide some additional analysis on how communities have changed from the 2030 planning process to the 2040 planning process, and where some of those land use takeaways are happening as well. And I believe that that will happen sometime in the summer of 2020. So we need time. It depends actually on how quickly the majority of authorized plans kind of happen. So we can't, we have to have more authorized plans than not. And we're not, like I mentioned, we're not quite at 50% yet. So that will come in time, but we are planning to come back and report out on those as well. There are other trends as well as it relates to financial planning. Some communities do that. Connected and automated vehicles is a new thing that we're seeing in some of the transportation plans. And then there are more communities that are doing some of the health planning as well. So those are all things that we're going to continue tracking, exploring more in depth, and we'll be coming back and reporting out on what we learn from there. With that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Isaac. Questions on that report? Any questions? Oh, thanks. We look forward to the next status update as well. This is really interesting data, the way you're presenting it. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. We'll move on to our final agenda item and information item number 3. It's the 2020 Community Development Committee Work Plan, and that will be presented by Director Barajas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members. I, in the interest of time, will...
I'm sorry, can I just interrupt you? I'm sorry, Lisa, to interrupt you, but I was just going to say that Director Barajas will make sure that the Ms. Torres PowerPoint presentation is linked from the agenda as well, so we'll have that available. Thank you, Lisa.
Yes, thank you. Absolutely, we will be sure that gets done. So you can peruse that further. And so related to what Angela was saying, we have a number of items that we're planning to bring to you this year. Part of them, and you see them in the draft staff report in front of you, information item. We have our regular business. I'll say how we build this is the stuff that we always have to do, the things we do on an annual cycle. So our Livable Communities programs, the things that related to our public housing agency and the different plans we have to adopt and payment standards we have to adopt at different times of year. Review of comp plans and amendments, kind of the ongoing work that you'll regularly see. Similarly in regional parks, grant reviews and master plan reviews. So we have a lot of baseline work that fills your agendas on a regular basis. And then we have our 2020 initiatives, and these are things that maybe only happen once every 10 years, like the comprehensive plan composite, some of the report outs on what more detailed report outs on what we are finding in those plans, in-depth analyses. And if you turn to page 3 of the report, you'll see some of these other items as well. As Tara had mentioned earlier, our re-enrollment process in for the 2021 to 2030 decade for livable communities, our regional parks visitor study, which we do about every 5 years-ish, or we're trying to do every 5 years-ish. Metro climate stats are continuing to track on our moving to work authorities for the public housing agency, and then additional work there. You can see as well that we have regular information items and reports telling you about the state of development in the region, so affordable housing production, plat monitoring, ag preserves, which we recently heard from Raya Ismaili about, our fiscal disparities report, regular reports from LUAC, etc. I don't mean to rush through everything, but I do wanted to bring this in front of you with kind of these questions in mind about making sure that we're capturing the things coming from your conversations about your this last fall around council goals and priorities. a lot of items we think are things that shape our livable communities programs and some of our reporting, specifically as it relates to housing. The climate work, I think we're still investigating. We put a placeholder now around kind of CD related climate work, but I think a lot of that might show up more at kind of committee of the whole and council places. But I wanted to ask you these questions. Are we capturing the items that in this work plan for CDC, given those recently formed priorities? Then moving on, are there additional information or other reports that the committee would seek to better inform the work that you do and the decisions that you're charged with? And kind of lastly, are there any other invited speaker or panel presentations that the committee is also interested in to, again, help better inform your work? So I know that not everybody's here today. The plan is to take your input over the next however many weeks, probably 2 weeks, so that I can prepare a final to bring to you in the first meeting of February. And what you'll see in that final work plan is both this detailed list as well as sort of a calendar, a schedule that shows how those different items will show up on your calendar over the next 12 months in a more graphic format, kind of easy snapshot. So what we have in here today, as Angela was saying, are related to some high-level months when you would expect to see some of those actions. Some of those dates may change, given how quickly we get some of those plans in, given some more work planning discussions that we'll have as staff about when we can reasonably move things and making sure that we're not putting 15 items on one agenda and one on the next one. So really trying to balance those out as well. So any additional input you'd like to share tonight would be fabulous. If you'd like to email information as well, I'd be happy to take that over the next 2 weeks as we're forming up and finalizing plans.
Thank you, Director Barajas. Yeah. Discussion, Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you, Chair and Ms. Barajas. One of the things that I would like to see is, as we're getting information, maybe looking at how we can have the information presented to us for improved decision making. One of the things that helps me a great deal is to be able to measure where we came from and where we're going. So if we're looking at a comprehensive plan and it says, there's a statement that says increase to 22%, it's just easier for me to make a quick decision if I can see that it increased from 15 to 22%, for example. There may be additional charts so I can identify trends. What it was, some things are so innovative and new that we don't have a trend, we're just establishing baselines. But where we have some history, maybe looking at some additional charting so we can see and measure the progress or our strengths and weaknesses a little bit better. So my recommendations are going to be in line with how we can continuously improve as an organization and how we can make better decision making as a council member and also as a council as a whole.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've kind of been a broken record on this one for years, but we're always rushed when it comes to the Livable Communities annual fund distribution plan. Last year we couldn't take a deep dive because you guys were all learning what you're doing, or you weren't even here in the spring. And so this year we'll be doing the plan for what goes out this year, but I would like to have some time later in the year to take a really deep dive into Livable Communities and look at, is it really doing what we want it to do? Are our processes what they need to be to get the results that we want, and that sort of thing?
I think that's an excellent suggestion, Councilmember Wolf. And Director Barajas and I have been talking about ways of maybe engaging smaller groups of this committee, subcommittees, and things like that. Definitely in the Livable Communities re-enrollment, for example. But I think that's another topic where it may be worthwhile for some subset of this group to get a little deeper and give some staff some direction. I think that's an excellent suggestion. And then I would also ask, like Councilmember Chambers and others, as you communicate with Director Barajas with your ideas, I would really appreciate it if you'd include me on the communication as well, just so I'm getting an idea of where the committee's going, please. Further discussion, Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the goals I have is for this year, thinking about lowering the energy cost for families in affordable housing. And I'm particularly jazzed about this because I just recently read a report about the Denver Public Housing Authority. And I think just in the last month or so, they rolled out a 2 megawatt community solar garden that they own and operate themselves. That is lowering the utility bills for something between 500 to 700 families, low-income families in the Denver area by 20%. And they've made this, subscribing to this community solar garden available to their families, but also to other public housing authorities in that area. And it just made me think about the 150 single-family homes that we own and townhomes that we own and operate, and the cost burden for those families, and what can we do either in Denver. They own, like I said, they own and operate their own system, and it's a $3.8 million community solar array that they built. Is that a direction that we could head by putting another CSG on our wastewater buffer lands, for example? Or could we subscribe to one of the many CSGs that are already out there on behalf of the families that live in these units that we own? I don't know what the right answer is, but I would like to explore it further in this year. And I'll send you more information about. I referenced this report. I'll send you all what I know about it.
Did you want to say something, Dirk?
Sure, Mr. Chair. I would just offer that with the houses that we do own, because of the distributed nature of them, and we're not operating them like public housing, it's a little bit different. It's a lot harder to do a single CSG to serve all of them. They're all kind of all over the place.
Yeah.
One of the projects, though, that we are investigating, and I haven't added everything yet to this work plan that you see in front of you, because we have projects that are in the hopper that need to kind of get up to this point. But one of the projects we are investigating is how we might support landlords through our voucher program in connecting to either enrolling in a CSG or installing solar panels on their homes or on their buildings. So these would be 5 or 6 units at least in a building in order for that cost effectiveness. Bringing the technical assistance to play and help kind of reduce the installation costs, not through money, but through selecting and organizing the activity for a landlord to be able to have solar generated power on their building and reduce the cost of electricity at least for residents there in exchange for participating in the voucher program. So as part of that, so we're investigating the ins and outs of that, what a program might look like, getting general interest from landlords on that, and seeing if it's feasible. But yes, that's something that we would definitely come to talk to you all about, especially if it is feasible.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion, Councilmember Bento, do you?
I have some speaker topic
Oh, great.
suggestions, but I'll send them in email to both.
Thank you.
Both you and Ms. Rojas.
Any further discussion on the 2020 Community Development Committee work plan? I have a feeling we'll have more discussion. We may even want to draft an email to go out to the entire committee members that highlighted those, whatever they were, 3 or 4 questions that you raised.
I will do that, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Further discussion? Further discussion. Thank you very much. And it was a very good report, and I'm looking forward to the final Fine. Do we vote on that? I'm sorry, I should have, yeah. Yes.
Yes, Mr. Chair. At your first meeting in February, you will have a business item in front of you to formally adopt your work plan.
Okay.
So that will be an item that will be here for the committee. Doesn't go to the council, but
Okay.
just this committee.
Great. Thank you. Thanks.
Mr. Chair,
Councilmember Vento.
I've been on various committees, boards, whatever, but
You have.
this was one of the best beginning of the year meetings of any entity I've ever been involved with. I feel like, I don't know, it feels really good in terms of continuing the portions of the conversation that obviously have to be continued, but having a really good grasp on what lies ahead in the next 12 months. So I just want to thank you and all the staff and our chair. This was very, very inspiring and invigorating for me. So thank you.
Thank you for that affirming comment. Anything else? Then seeing no business before this committee, we're adjourned.